If you're watching this, I'm assuming that you've watched all 5 seasons of The Dragonprince Mystery of Erebos. If you haven't, I'd recommend hitting that watch later button and coming back after you've seen this amazing show. Let's talk about magic. Hello Future Me is an amazing YouTube channel that discusses story structure, characterization, world building, and has a ton of videos about Avatar, a particular subject of interest on this channel. I was watching Tim's video on The Legend of Korra episodes Beginnings Part 1 and 2, and I was struck by his description of the spirit world. It made perfect sense, but I'd never really thought about it in the way he described it. The spirits of Avatar exemplify a trope called blue and orange morality. Their actions can't really be divided up into good or bad, light and dark. Hence his criticisms of Rava and Batu, the retconned spirits of good and evil, light and dark. The whole appeal of the spirit world is that it's incomprehensible and mysterious. Heibai, for instance, doesn't care whether its actions are good or bad based on any kind of human standard. It protects the forest, for reasons that you don't get to know. It doesn't speak a human language, it makes no overtures at diplomacy. It's just this uninhibited emotional creature that lashes back at a community that doesn't know how it has transgressed upon it. I guess, now that I think about it, I don't think the community in that episode did transgress upon it. Hello Future You can figure it out. The science of bending is similarly hazy, and that's not a flaw, it's a feature. But the Dragonprince brings something else to the general structure of Avatar's magic system that I find particularly compelling. So, there's just no hiding how much the Dragonprince draws off of Avatar. Elemental systems in magical worlds are far from new, but the show isn't exactly encouraging you to forget that other show that Aaron Ahaj and Jack DeSena are most known for.
Boomerang?
Both systems have definitive groups who seem to arbitrarily have weird abilities inspired by nature. Both the elements and the primal sources seem to metaphorically embody the characteristics humans might ascribe to them. There is some emphasis placed on learning how to channel the ideas exemplified in the elemental sources through meditation and life. In Avatar, the elemental bending system seems vaguely biologically inherited, but it's clearly not something that is fully understood. As Tim points out, if you're going to reveal a mystery, the revelation has to be more exciting and satisfying than the feeling of mystery itself. By contrast, the primal sources in The Dragonprince are a lot more knowable, and there are strengths and weaknesses to that. The sources are sort of anthropomorphized. They're endowed with a sense of intention and a capacity for abstract thought. They craft a kind of ethos, and there's a sort of aesthetic sensibility to the way they communicate their values to humans. Or, things that can talk. The sources embody central, conceptual, singular ideas that inspire the user with the ability to do magic. These central ideas are called arcana, and each arcanum lends the user with a sort of knowledge that lies between words. Cannot possibly be ensnared in the normal analog framework of the coarse, bureaucratic, and categorical human mind. This secret knowledge is what allows dragons, elves, and other magical creatures to do primal magic. Alright, Avatar didn't have nearly this amount of explanation for its magic system. Surely the Dragonprince is demanding that its rules be challenged. An arcanum is a piece of knowledge, therefore anyone can learn it, right? Regardless of from whom they got their genes. Either that, or the message is really that humans lack the sensitivity and profundity that magical beings have, but that doesn't really seem right to me. And further, not all magical beings seem to be very sensitive to the sublime truths that the Arcana are supposed to teach.
I don't really think about it. I just stand in the light of the full moon, and then there's a feeling like, shwa-wa-wa-wa, and then there's a sort of ting, and then psha, moon shadow powers.
And sure enough, this assumption is challenged, but not right away. And I think this writing decision is one of the smartest things about the series. So Callum is an adorable little dumbass who's also quite bright, and he has a secret capacity for sensitivity that is usually emergent when he's around a pretty girl. Why does that sound so familiar? Oh yeah, he's literally the Dragonprince's version of Sokka. I don't think I realized until this show how much Jack DeSena was probably the best actor in Avatar. He just fucking kills it. So, Callum clearly loves Ezran a whole lot, but the fact that his little brother is destined to become king one day, whereas he is destined for nothing in particular, makes him feel inadequate, and also kind of lost. When he loses his short-lived feeling of having a place in the world and being good at something, he's left completely adrift.
Humans can't do magic.
But I did do magic.
Right. With a primal stone. But then you smashed it, so now you're just a standard human again.
This can't be. I thought magic was my thing. I was good at it.
I mean, he goes up a lightning rod in the middle of a thunderstorm. He's clearly desperate. He's untethered. It is at this stage that Callum uses dark magic for the first time. He's a good person with a good purpose at that moment, but he kills a creature, doing harm to it and himself. If you're very clever, this general series of events might ring a bell for you. Hold that thought. While the history of the Dragonprince's world doesn't hold the same mystique as Avatar's, there's a real benefit to just how transparent the past is. We see a full conversation between a mage and a dragon that took place hundreds of years before the current story. There's less of a boundary between then and now, the cause and the effect. And if you've been paying attention to the themes of the show, you know that it's about the illusion that history determines our fate. The illusion. The Dragonprince's iteration of the magic system works brilliantly with the themes and tension of the show in a way that I think is kind of unique. Dark magic is a cruel practice because it forces the mage to kill magical creatures. It was given to humans because they were essentially an underclass in the world they came from. An entire city of humans was burned to the ground because of the actions of one dark mage. Regardless of that mage's actions, this retribution is unnecessarily cruel and inhumane. The way Viren and Claudia see it, dark magic is a mechanism for justice, a deterrent against attack, and also a statement on the worth of humans. How humiliating and devastating to be thrown out of your homeland and sent to fight each other for scraps on barren land. Humans are a displaced population in this show. That's ethnic cleansing. That's literally a war crime. The past feels closer in the Dragonprince because it is closer. It took centuries for this displaced population to rebuild itself, and all based on the incorrect assumption that humans can't do primal magic. So there's a cycle here. Powerful beings underestimate the less powerful and use overwhelming force to convince them of their own powerlessness. This powerlessness is also worthlessness. There is a sense that a human is more disposable than a magical being. The powerless are terrified, having experienced the might of the powerful, and grasp at whatever they can in order to defend and support themselves. This scares the powerful. They question their superiority and their safety and their security. Vengeance, aggression, and the lust for power are all exposed time and time again to be the results of cowardice. Real bravery can only be demonstrated by having the courage to not escalate, perhaps to accept a level of violence in order to stop the cycle of violence. Callum's internal conflict cinches this theme very well. The show makes sure that you feel Callum's desperation and aimlessness before allowing him to do primal magic. He even has to do dark magic before he's able to do primal magic. Actually, doing dark magic is what allows him to be able to do primal magic. I'm just realizing that now, so I didn't write about it. Yes, because he does dark magic, he gets sick, he starts having like a crazy fever dream, and that's what puts him in the meditative headspace to slow down his nervous system and put all the knowledge that he's accumulated together. This mind, it's doing something. Not with me being involved, but it's up to some things. By the time Callum learns the Sky Arcana, he has already put himself in a life or death situation for the slimmest chance of being able to do magic. He has learned that his father, a fundamental anchor in his life, has been killed at the hands of magical creatures, and he has killed a living being in order to cast a spell, something he said he would never do. At Callum's lowest, we see that doing dark magic, something that is unambiguously cruel, could be a reasonable last resort, as in kind people could find a reason to do it. And, well, isn't that exactly the story of humanity's relationship with dark magic? Humans were taught they needed to do dark magic, because naturally, no human is capable of understanding the transcendent glory of primal source arcana for reasons. And when humans used dark magic to survive, they were punished. So Ziard, the dark mage from the introduction of the show, has unambiguously been demonstrated to be, like, monstrous and villainous. And then in that scene where he talks to Sol Regum, he's recontextualized as compassionate and brave and kind. It's kind of an amazing, brilliant scene, just how effortlessly they move away from this caricature. It reframes that introduction in such an amazing, subtle way. It doesn't really draw too much attention to it. This was the propaganda, and this was the actual story. Ziard doesn't have to die in this scene, but he's willing to do so in order to save other people. Callum regrets doing dark magic, but does he regret saving his friends? My next video is going to dig more deeply into the antagonists of the Dragonprince, but for right now, I just want to say that the Dragonprince is one of the most unified shows I've ever seen. Let me explain. We generally agree that good stories imitate life, that's what makes them exciting and satisfying. When we talk about themes, what we're alluding to is the specific point or points that the story gives voice to something that we can recognize in our world. For example, one of the themes of Hamlet is the paralyzing inaction that thoughtful people are often plagued by. Hamlet is at once very intelligent and has very high standards of behavior, and while he's wandering around listlessly, unable to square his goals with his moral code, dumber, rasher, and crueler people are running around making a mess of things with no inhibitions. And the worse Hamlet becomes, the more active he becomes. And doesn't that feel true in a way that words alone can't really express? Shakespeare corroborates and solidifies your views of the world through these themes, and that feels really cathartic to watch. Some pieces return to their themes by and by, occasionally. More episodic works have to dip their toes into different things. Shows like Avatar, for instance. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with this. I just want to make that clear. There are a lot of amazing works out there that feel a bit more sprawling. You move through them sort of languorously, seeing new things and learning more about the world. But there are some pieces that just feel like, concentrated diamonds of pure theme. Hamlet is one of them. And then there are these highly conceptual pieces like Ghost in the Shell. They're trying to draw attention to the themes that they're discussing. You don't exactly watch Ghost in the Shell to, have a parasocial relationship, right? That's what I'm saying. But the Dragonprince returns to the many facets of its theme over and over again in just about every interaction. To be free from violence, you must abstain from violence. The cycle of violence is caused by fear, but being fearful doesn't absolve you from the responsibility of breaking that cycle. There's an unbearable hippie sermon buried under the material of the Dragonprince. But the story is so focused on showing us how the theme works that we don't feel like we're being lectured at. Instead, we feel like we're being exposed to a profound truth that can't be ensnared in words alone. And maybe this knowledge can imbue us with some amazing power. Is that how we're ending this? No, that can't be right. Ew. I have over 200 subscribers now. I can't be cheesy anymore. Listen here, you maggot. You better subscribe or I'll say something mean about you in the comments section. Yeah, so you don't want that, do you? I have nothing but purely ironic feelings toward you until I'm big enough to start a Patreon. Then I'll start having purely genuine feelings for you again. I've discovered that I ship Virabos. No, I'm disappointed too. In my last video, we talked about how the themes of the Dragonprince are integrated into the magic and lore of the series. Well, actually, I talked about it? You kinda just stared at me silently. I found it disturbing. This video is going to be the start of a series where I discuss the 3 main antagonists of the Dragonprince. And you can participate if you want. You know, could be fun for a change. There's a line that I fixated on in season 5.
It is everything to me to know that I mean something to you. To know that I matter.
I find it quite interesting because I don't really know what it means. It feels thematically out of left field. We've had this strong network of motivations going. You know, love creates fear, fear creates the will to power, and the will to power leads to violence. Makes sense to me. This introduction of something more, a need to be desired or loved or admired, it's not what I was expecting. Of course, Mystery of Erebos can't just reiterate the themes of the first 3 seasons. This is a heavily theme-based show. To justify the need for more story, we need more exploration of the theme. It needs to become more tangled and complicated. So, season 4 and 5 do that, in my opinion. The motif of sky and the freedom it represents is replaced with the motif of ocean, which we are told exemplify bonds and trust. The shift in thematic focus is really hammered into us. Viren's fever dream shows him charging into a sea of blood as he tries to save his daughter, his blood, from sinking into the same trajectory he did. Much of the season is about a marriage, not just between individuals, but cultures. And maybe species? Let's not think about that. We also have a ton of mirroring, visual bonding. Callum mirrors Viren, and Viren mirrors him right back. Kareem mirrors Viren, Claudia mirrors Viren, Viren mirrors Viren, Rayla mirrors Amaya, Ezrin mirrors Harrow, and Janai mirrors Ezrin. Claudia and Rayla seem to mirror each other all the time. Viren mirrors Harrow in his acceptance of death to break a chain. There's also a literal mirror, which in turn evokes the death of Avazandum, which started the whole story. Bonds and connections and cycles everywhere. But is this just a shift in theme? Or is the story in the midst of an ironic and tragic moral collapse? I am feeling so dramatic today. Freedom and love are almost opposites. One can be either fettered or unfettered. There's a dichotomy there. And indeed, the Dragonprince does sometimes take an anti-love stance. Not literally, but within the thematic language of the show, specific love for individuals needs to be tempered with a sort of universal love. Harrow is a really solid example of this. He's supposed to be a servant to his nation, but he opts into a situation where 50,000 of his own people will die of starvation. His love for his own does not overrule his responsibility to the world. And of course, he dies because of an act of hatred for Avazandum, but that hatred is rooted in a love for Sarai. And so, when bonds and love became so much more present in these seasons, I started getting curious about the direction the show might be taking with our supposed good guys and bad guys. Is it good that Callum trusts Rayla after she sneaks into his office? I mean, hey, she's probably good-intentioned, but maybe it's kind of short-sighted to preferentially pardon your own buddy when you have a position of huge authority and prominence. And Janai and Amaya are super cute and I'm rooting for them, but Janai doesn't seem to have thought through the implications of her marriage to a human. She's kind of inviting the oncoming insurrection that the season 5 finale seems to be foreshadowing. And these missteps aren't a mistake. Ezrin's speech in the beginning of season 4 telegraphs that we are wading into new waters. Our free, unencumbered child characters are older now, and as their bonds and loves and relationships grow, so will their capacity for violence. Finnegran's Wake had some truly insufferable everybody say love moments. This show has never fixated on love to this extent. Love is a volatile, tricky thing that needs to be handled carefully. But that was a misdirect, wasn't it? Just a few minutes later we find out that Callum has done dark magic to save Rayla. His love causes him to sacrifice his values. In just a short scene, our thematic framework is back in business. The power of love, or whatever, is just not something the show subscribes to. Speaking of subscribing, you may have noticed that your subscribe button just, became kind of rainbowy and nice when I said that word. Feel free to click it. It seems pretty inviting. Why not? Callum mirrors Harrow here, turning against his principles in an expression of his love for someone. Hunger and fear drive social change in Zadia and the human territories in a way that I haven't seen as extensively explored in other fantasy worlds. I could be ignorant, but it seems sort of unique to me, or at least exceptional, among other fantasy worlds. Like in most fantasy, magic has implications on the politics of the world. But in the Dragonprince, it's not so much about the magic getting or staying in the wrong hands, it's about the equitable distribution of magic. The Dragonprince explores the material conditions of magic, and that inherently ties the macro and the micro together in a very clear way. It's this seemingly limited resource that is gatekept by those with abundant access to it. And that affects everything from who will win a war to how good the harvest will be that year. And in turn, that will affect whether your wife gets to watch her children grow up, or if your son gets to survive an illness. Violence can absolutely be an expression of love, and magic is used to demonstrate that. So, I'm assuming you're with me so far. The Dragonprince believes that love can be a vice. With all this in mind, let's return to our first big bad, Viren. The daddy of daddies. Erebos is more daddy than Viren. Viren is kind of pathetic. He doesn't know why he does the things he does. Even his acts of self-immolation in service of his cause don't read as badass. He's fumbling around in the dark for anything to latch onto. He literally meets Erebos because he throws a hissy fit and all the lights turn off. Viren is just so tragic to me. He's pitiable when he wants to look strong. He's neurotic when he wants to look brave. He wants to hold on to those he loves so fiercely he pushes them away. He calls an invasion of Zadia a strong choice, without any self-awareness of how cowardly and obsessive he looks to everyone around him. He genuinely loves his children and would do anything for them. Except no, he is willing to let Soren die. He claims to love Harrow. You know, like a brother. But he also really wants to kill his children. It's kind of amazing how confused and short-sighted he is while retaining that image of being under control. However dangerous, however vile become his arc words. I love how idiotic yet compelling that is. He's this Henry Kissinger figure who thinks pragmatism means hitting first and hoping that scares your opponent into submission. His ego refuses to let him see how badass and heroic pacifism can be. The only way to achieve security is by offering security to others. That's badass, and that is pragmatic. Viren, by contrast, is a quivering, scared little dumbass who lives and dies being a selfish coward. Dying is the most noble thing he ever does. Except, is that true? Viren encapsulates a lot of the irony that the Dragonprince feeds off of. Like any really good antagonist should, he seems to embody the themes of the story with more depth than the protagonists do. You know how Rayla is an assassin that can't kill, and the irony of that drives her to realize that she's actually a protector? And how Ezrin is a king that refuses to wield coercive power, and that ironically gives him the freedom to save the day. Well, Viren's irony is so ironic that it threatens the thematic fabric of the show. Viren's love for Claudia is so great that he submits himself to death in order to prevent her from walking down the same dark path that he did. And we intuitively feel like this is an act of redemption. But was that really the right choice for Viren to make? Is that really what the story has been demanding from him? Because Viren isn't a coward, I lied to you before. He authentically feels that he is a servant at his core. And though he doesn't appreciate being degraded for it, even in the bedroom, he repeatedly puts his body and his happiness and his loved ones on the line for some higher purpose he doesn't really seem able to articulate. Viren is afraid of something, but losing his children isn't it. He's proven that. So why is this the gesture, dying to save his daughter's soul, his redeeming moment? Is it really just a mundane rejection of dark magic? Because, God, I seriously hope it's not. The show has not adequately explained to me why dark magic is morally different than eating meat or killing in self-defense. So I'm gonna just charitably assume that that's not what's happening here. I think the reason has to do with this idea of Viren's self-image that we started the video with. It's the symbol. It's how this gesture will be perceived by those who love him.
To know that I mean something to you. To know that I matter.
He wants Claudia to come back on land, see his body, see that he has refused to kill Sir Sparklepuff, and realize that this sacrifice means that she has to get back on track. Do you see how this isn't meaningfully very different from his behavior up until this point? His irony, his flaw, has always been that he grasps and clings to these faulty images of safety and comfort, all while putting himself and his loved ones in danger. He thinks if he keeps climbing higher and higher in power and conquers more and more, everything will eventually be okay. But each step up exposes him to more retaliation, more violence. Why on earth would cultivating his daughter's fear and hatred and drive toward power and violence, and then just friggin' dying, leaving her without any direction, be helpful in this situation? He's being just as short-sighted and delusional as ever. And yet, it is unambiguously an act of love. By freeing Claudia from his influence, she almost becomes a child again. She isn't responsible for taking care of him anymore. She doesn't have to continue walking down his path. His death removes Claudia's need to love and care for him. Viren knows that Terry is a far better influence on her than he is, so he decides to trust him and permanently pieces out of her life. There's the tragic irony of Viren again. The most confused character is also the one making the biggest and most rash decisions. We've been talking about love and how it often encumbers the kind of freedom that enables peace. But then there's this quote that I keep returning to, of Viren wanting to matter to Harrow. It introduces the idea that love doesn't just cause you to want to protect the subjects of your love, it also causes you to want to be loved back. Is that the element that ties Viren together, balances out these two seemingly opposing sides, the trembling fear and the callous recklessness? Viren's biggest sin is the cruelty with which he offers up his children to the advancement of his projects. They are his greatness. He doesn't just love them, they are the thing about him that is to be loved and admired. They are his greatness. They are what makes him admirable and lovable. He doesn't know his children because he doesn't really see them as individuals. He sees them as extensions of himself. This becomes strikingly clear through his adorable relationship with Terry. Viren comes to know Terry in a way that he never even tries to get to know his own children. Terry pushes back against Viren, forces him to consider things from his perspective. And Viren actually admires him as a result. He even calls him wonderful. And he says trans rights. Viren's treatment of Soren really clinches this for me. Soren's body is just a resource that Viren gets to use. Viren isn't strong like his son, so Soren gets to be his strength. Claudia is a more powerful mage than he is, having grown up learning this material while Viren had to learn it as an adult. So her powers just become an extension of his. But we all die alone. In his final moments, Viren becomes his own entity again. He decides to set his children free, and reckon with the sum of his value without them. Who does he see in himself in those final moments? What was he without his children, without his tools for recognition and love? And whatever he saw there, did it mean something to anyone? Did it matter to anyone? Well, luckily for him, a bunch of Claudia's blood got in the ocean, so maybe he'll get resurrected after all. Better luck next time. Speaking of Claudia, tune in next time to learn about the other side of the coin. What does it mean to be an extension of our parents? What happens when our need to protect those we love actively hurts them? Would I both kill and die for Terry? Yes. Sorry, that wasn't a cliffhanger. See you in the next one. My roommate has decided to start breaking cardboard boxes or something, so this might be a difficult audio to get through, but we're gonna do our best over here at TimeCapsule Studios. In my last video, I talked about Viren's selfish use of his children to prove his own value to the world. Viren doesn't really know his children because he thinks of them as expressions of his will. Viren's stated goal is to do violence to protect his children, but it becomes clear that he does violence to justify his use of his children. By choosing to die, he frees them. He allows them to become the people they are, rather than extensions of himself. So, who are his children, with and without him? I find Claudia to be just a particularly disturbing character, one I can't think about for too long without getting a knot in my stomach. She provides a startling example of how children come to authentically integrate their parents' beliefs into their own. Claudia is so different from her father in so many ways, yet he is so clearly present in all of her actions. People grow up to be very different from their parents on all sorts of levels, but in the ways that really matter, they seem to take up the torch of their parents' projects. This opens up all sorts of difficult questions about free will and destiny. How culpable can we hold children for taking on their parents' beliefs? Can we even call these beliefs those of their parents if the children go on to sincerely adopt them? Or are they complicit in whatever horrible acts follow from these beliefs? On some level, Claudia embraces her father's vision for her. Being a weapon in Viren's arsenal is a point of pride for her. She fits herself right in with his activities, even the particularly unsavory ones. She interacts with his prisoners. She can intuit his commands without being told. She provides for him in every way possible. But she isn't a computer. She wasn't given a set of commands to live by, and she didn't pick up her father's goals and ideas just because he wanted her to. Rather, she grew into the person she is as a result of the life she's lived and the thoughts and feelings she's experienced. The impact of her parents' separation and her mother's abandonment, the experience of having a really emotionally difficult father, her observations of the struggle and adversity that humanity as a collective has faced over the centuries, all of these things, plus her own unique personality, somehow bring her in line with her father's wishes. Kids are smart. They have a way of developing their own thought patterns and ideas, all while integrating the worldviews of their parents and societies. Have you ever been in charge of a child who is a total monster to adults, but is secretly really nice to other kids? That's them unconsciously coming to the conclusions adults want them to come to. Take the scene where Viren tells Claudia to save the dragon egg, at all costs. We see in Claudia's eyes that she has understood the gravity of what Viren is telling her. She angles her face down and shadow spills over her features. And then, half a second later, her face literally brightens up, and she seems to be her ridiculous, perky self again. But this is a guise. She is using her silly reputation to pose an awkward question that she needs to ask, but can't ask openly. When Viren seems too struck to answer, she assumes that it never even occurred to him that Claudia would ever let her brother, his son, die to get an egg. This satisfies her, and she plays off her question as a joke. But Viren understands the subtext, because he's taught her how to discuss the grislier aspects of their work together. Claudia is actually trying to understand her orders, and he clarifies. choose the egg. Claudia spends the earliest part of her life processing Viren's ideas in the back of her mind while developing into her individual self. And since Claudia is so ethically normal and well-adjusted, it took me a while to accept that she was going to follow Viren's path long-term. In retrospect, it seems pretty obvious, but the trend in shows like this tends to be that the villain's morally neutral teammates start off well-intentioned but needlessly cruel, then they get worse, and then they get better. Claudia's downward trajectory is kind of disturbing. Really disturbing, actually. I almost want to compare her to Oedipus in terms of tragedy. Over 5 seasons, you're waiting for her big change, and it just doesn't happen. Her entirely predictable behavior, well-intentioned though it might be, just continuously gets worse. Soren is a much more common villain variant, at least in the past decade and a half. He's a silly little Zuko boy, and while he doesn't express much remorse for the bad things that he's done, and he has the narrative agency of a Season 1 Bolin, we get the idea that he's, a good guy. But Claudia is almost like an Alphaba figure, getting ushered down a path of more bitterness and violence for being too well-meaning. That's book Alphaba, not musical Alphaba. Big difference. And this uneasiness I feel around Claudia is compounded by the fact that she is presented to us as a free thinker, and just a pretty liberated person in most respects. She certainly doesn't seem that concerned with her dad's approval. She's very self-possessed. She's idiosyncratic, quirky, unapologetically herself. I could be wrong about this, but I feel like she's the only 3-dimensional animated character who actually has the confidence to flirt with their crush openly. She has an offbeat sense of humor, sometimes a really gross sense of humor. She's an eccentric genius with a love of both the morbid and the adorable. And she's pretty nice and empathetic, even though she's also a little bit creepy. And Viren is a bureaucratic, humorless asshole. If Soren is the Zuko to Viren's Ozai, Claudia is a very strange interpretation of Azula. How tragically ironic, then, that this free-thinking, non-conforming, confident kid is also the one least able to break out of her harmful assigned role. As in the last 2 videos I've made on this show, I'm not just interested in these individual instances of tragic irony. I'm focused on how this characterization furthers the show's theme of systemic generational violence. The Dragonprince is about perpetuating cycles of fear that lead to death and loss. I have argued that love is that catalyst that turns fear into violence, and no single character embodies the linchpin in the show's theme quite as completely as Claudia. Unlike her father, Claudia is undeniably driven by a love for her family. She loves them so much, in fact, that on 2 separate occasions she significantly removes their agency and hamstrings their growth. She feels a compulsive need to keep her family unit in the exact same form it was in when her mother left. Otherwise, something undescribably painful might happen. The unknown is very scary to her. So, there's a scene in Season 2 where Soren gets injured. And it looks bad. Like, I actually kind of found it shocking. There's a little bit of gore in The Dragonprince, but certainly not to the level that you would expect in an adult-oriented show of a similar kind. But just look at this. Oh fuck! His body is just broken, and he's terrified. This is a huge, symbolic moment for Soren, and he picks up on that right away. I said in my last video that Soren has been made to see himself as essentially a body for his father's use. So, with the loss of his body, he gains some self-ownership. And that idea is very exciting to him. He decides that he's actually happy to remain permanently quadriplegic. In a really touching moment, Soren decides that this is the best thing that could have possibly happened to him. He immediately decides that he's going to be a poet, and it's just one of the most lovely little scenes in the entire show. He's earnestly really excited for this vision of himself that he just conjured up. Listen to him. He's like stuttering with exhilaration.
I'm going to be a poet, and people will come hear my poems. They'll come visit me, and we'll drink some kind of soothing tea, and then I'll say my latest poems to them.
The revelation comes with a huge sense of potential. Soren becomes more childish in this scene, as we would expect from a moment punctuated by freedom. He imagines that he has a self to realize now. Whereas in the context of his relationship with his father, he's expected to be a set of armor without a brain. Viren puts Soren's body on the line and doesn't provide much in the way of explanation, assuming that Soren doesn't need one since he couldn't understand it anyway. And then Claudia just takes that away from him. She gives him his body back without his consent. And it's heartbreaking. I really wanted Soren to remain quadriplegic. It felt so right, and raw too. What a fearless expression of how objectified Soren is in his father's eyes. His body is taken from him, almost like he's being digested by Viren's inflated self-image. I'd suspected that Soren's character had drawn inspiration from Jaime Lannister, and this event sort of clinched it for me. I thought Soren losing control of his body would force him to consider his worth and self-image beyond his ability to fight, the way Jaime losing his hand prompts him to consider the value he offers his family. Like Jaime, Soren would have to choose how he wanted to move forward with the knowledge that he can't be an unthinking sword anymore. It could have been an amazing journey of self-discovery. But at the same time, what? Am I gonna hate Claudia for healing her brother? Claudia's actions have this effect on me a lot. It's not just that you can understand every decision she makes, it's that every decision she makes feels like the only thing she could have possibly done. Killing an adorable little fawn is horrid, but if it means saving her family and Soren's place in it, she's gotta do it, right? A similar thing happens with Viren. In Season 4, Claudia has temporarily resurrected him, and she's trying to help him make the resurrection permanent. But Viren isn't so sure he wants to spend his last 30 days struggling to stay alive. He tells Claudia that he wants to live out his remaining time in contentment and tranquility. And you're like, yes, go do that. Go watch the sunset and eat cake for a month. Get to know your child. Stop grasping at life, because at some point it's going to outrun you and you won't have experienced any of it. But while you could argue that this ought to be his decision to make, it's also really selfish and insensitive of him. Claudia spent 2 years trying to bring him back to life. One of the first things she tells him is that she did horrible, traumatic things to make it happen. She slaps him for saying this, and I kinda think I would too. She's had to be strong and fearless for 2 years, and Viren can't even do it for 30 days? And like, Viren doesn't want to climb the mountain, right? He's kicking the can down the road, and Claudia can see that. So, once again, Claudia forces the continuation of a cycle that really just isn't very good for anyone. Claudia is Viren's superego, in a way. She seems to have sincerely adopted the values her father mindlessly espouses without any real internal clarity. Viren says he does anything, however dangerous, however vile, for his family, but as we discussed in my last video, that's not true of him. On the other hand, Claudia does do dangerous and vile things for her family. Viren is afraid of not being loved or important to those he cares for, but Claudia is actually afraid of losing her family. I think this distinction is valuable. Viren is a network of contradictions. He's a vague set of goals and ideas tenuously bundled together to form an ideological framework. In his struggle to protect those he's become responsible for, he makes bold and rash decisions. To be honest, I kinda think he was right to kill the Magma Titan. I don't think anyone from Zadia would have lifted a finger to save 100,000 human lives from starvation. So, fuck man, eat the rich. But the fallout of each decision becomes worse and worse. Then you have to kill Avazandum because he killed Sarai, and then you have to kill Avazandum's egg because shit, we just killed that egg's dad. And the next thing you know, you've stolen an egg, turned yourself into a zombie, and your best friend and maybe on-again, off-again lover is dead. So what now, bitch? What now? Viren fumbles into a cycle of behavior he then justifies retroactively. by making it sound like strategy, pragmatism. By contrast, Claudia is given a clear moral code by her father, which she interprets with a sort of dispassionate clarity. Viren has clearly gone through some stuff in his life, which has provoked a set of highly sensitive pathological fears. But we get the sense Claudia hasn't had to be exposed to real suffering, at least not in the beginning of her life. Viren teaches Claudia his philosophy, and Claudia has learned how to intuit the darker aspects of his realpolitik. It's an academic exercise for her. With Viren's instruction in a safe environment, Claudia has grown up to be intelligent but naive. Her understanding of politics is practical to a fault, because that's what she's been taught. Claudia can't even imagine why Harrow wouldn't want to send a subject to die in his place. But Viren gets it. Viren being willing to die for Harrow wouldn't particularly be helpful in the situation as far as the kingdom is concerned. It's really not a very pragmatic suggestion if we're being honest. Harrow would be trapped in the body of a person no one trusts, and the one person with the ability to do anything about it would be dead. But, honor, friendship, trust, ephemeral, frivolous things that Viren does care about. Viren thinks that he has a special, loving relationship with the king, tells himself that dying for him is a fitting conclusion to his life. Harrow disrupting that script, recontextualizing the signifiers of their relationship, is what makes Viren so furious with him. Viren understands social, symbolic language. Sometimes it takes a great or dangerous act to champion a cause or make a statement. You can't fully think some things through because they're not strictly utilitarian. Why do you marry someone you love? Why do you lay a flower on a grave? Why do you make art? It's because our minds aren't pragmatism machines. They are far more attracted to and persuaded by symbols. They seek them out and deal with them in a way that feels emotionally correct. But these are things that we learn with age and time and experience. Claudia grows up in sort of a sterile, controlled environment. She's brought up in a castle. She learns a very specialized skill from a young age. And we know she's a good person. She's empathetic and steadfast. This innate kindness works within her inherited moral system, not against it. She believes in her father's principles about détente and his vicious brand of utilitarianism because she thinks they lead to good outcomes, and not because they flatter her ego, like some people. She has a sort of wide-eyed innocence about dark magic, seeing it as a way of converting the special into the human. And this despair is inherent to Claudia's character. She wants to do good, has a moral system set up for her to teach her how to do good. Everything she does is morally upright, or at least justifiable. But she does bad things. So we must conclude that the morality she was taught is wrong. Her fundamental sense of what is good just can't be right. She thinks that what's best for your family is going to be the best thing for the world, and that's just not true. In Claudia, Viren has refined his own worldview, and it has not held up under scrutiny. Throughout the time we spend with her, Claudia goes from being an exceptional student who learns all of Viren's ideas into an independent agent gathering her own set of biases and grudges. Seasons 4 and 5 do not depict a naive child trying her best to do what's right. Instead, we see a young adult who has matured into an understanding of history that fundamentally changes her beliefs and actions. In pain and struggle, Claudia's world has become a bit smaller. She isn't fighting for something she thinks the world needs. She's turned on the world to take care of her own. She's embittered with the pain of love. How does no one understand why she wants to protect her father? Why is everyone fighting her at every turn when she's just trying to do the right thing? At the end of season 5, Claudia loses a leg. It's a horrible price for a character who took on a heavy burden to make sure her brother's body remained whole. And she's not a cackling villain in her last on-screen moments. She's a deeply broken and injured person who keeps getting things taken away from her and she doesn't understand why. It feels like a cruel place to leave her. Who will accept an unspeakable moral stain upon their own soul to save her as she has done for others? Does Claudia have a choice? Does the question even matter? No one with a heart like hers deserves a life as wretched as this. And here's what Claudia's arc really says about the themes of the Dragonprince. A society that cannot protect its children and most vulnerable will never become kinder and more pacifistic. It's not only a society's job to abstain from violence whenever possible, it must also actively teach and nurture its inhabitants. No one should be shunned or locked at the bottom of a sea or exiled into the desert. Because no one is fully responsible for their actions, we all inherit patterns of behavior, and most people who do bad things are trying their best with the minds they've been given. A social and political system should not be capable of taking a person like Claudia and turning them into a violent outcast. Something is still very wrong here. As an older teenager, Claudia has a specific role in the motific language of the show. Not a child with complete freedom from grudges and fear, but also not an adult with that pervasive cynicism that ties up emotional energy with a need for domination and survival. She's an excellent use of the network of associations that we tie to teenhood. As we gain experience and knowledge, our moral codes tend to flourish, break, reform, spark to life in new and unexpected ways. And speaking of the symbolism of age, why does one of the oldest beings in the world, a creature of almost unfathomable power, concern himself with the petty goings-on of humankind? In the next video, we're gonna talk about and speculate on the character of Erebos. Yes, Daddy of Daddies, you remembered, good job! See you there. I didn't have a place to put this in the script, so I'm just gonna say it now. I was appalled by the fact that Soren and Viren's reunion, happened off screen, or I don't know what happened, but Soren sees him, has a weird, overdone sort of comedic no moment, and there's no recognition of the fact that his father, who he thought was dead, and who he has this extremely complicated relationship, is fucking alive, and seems to like his sister's boyfriend more than he likes him. Can we do anything with that? I just found that appalling. I don't get it. Anyway. So, there is a problem with the very premise of this video. I am by nature a very charitable reader. When an ongoing story makes a decision that concerns me, I like to assume that there's a good reason for it. As I hope I've shown by the fact that this is my 4th video on the Dragonprince, I think this is a very smart show. This is to say, I'm making this video before Season 6 comes out, and I'm going to be presenting you with an interpretation of the character of Erebos that I find interesting. To do so, I will be assuming that the show is not in the process of making a fundamental mistake in storytelling. But I'm also a cynic, and I hate looking stupid. So, in the interest of my enormous ego, I'm going to be explaining why the show might be in the process of making a fundamental mistake in its storytelling. Proceed with skepticism. Erebos was immediately compelling to me. I mean, obviously, I'm a misanthropic genderfuck. Erebos is very much my aesthetic. But more than that, there's nothing more compelling than a villain who plays it close to the chest. He's obviously enormously powerful, but we only see glimpses of that here and there. He's not interested in conspicuous shows of power, he likes to play it cool. Right after Viren accepts Erebos' help, he gets attacked by Opeli and a bunch of royal guard types. Erebos is given no information to go off of, is blindsided because he didn't know that Viren was actively being hunted down, and oh yeah, he's in jail miles away. And even with all that going on, he's still this calm, formidable force. He takes over Viren's body, casting spells through him and the staff, and he's just so sure of every move he makes. Duh, it's so cool! I was a bit disappointed with how the fight ends. The fact that he didn't have a response for, like, a couple people with bows and arrows just didn't feel right to me. But then, in Season 3, he astral projects himself into Luxaria and dissolves a person's body with a single touch. And you're like, okay, the guy's a fucking menace. But it's more than just his power that remains mysterious. His actions are also sort of inexplicable. Erebos is pretty transparently a satanic figure. You know, the morning star, the fallen angel who incites rebellion in humankind. One that challenges the power of God with sheer infernal rage. And yet, he works by supplicating to humans, appearing as a humble serpent, or a twink who offers to serve you at first meeting. He's extremely concerned with the way power presents itself. That's both a strategy as well as a sort of aesthetic sensibility. One of the first things he says to Viren is, "How may I serve you?" He's not embarrassed because he's not proud. He is extremely confident in the knowledge that he is stronger and smarter than everyone around him. So what need does he have to appear strong? He hates ostentatiousness. Of the little we know about his internal world, he is clearly revolted by what he repeatedly refers to as arrogance. The other star-touched elves are big-headed and self-aggrandizing. The Dragon King is an arrogant monster. He uses Kessa's bigotry and pompousness over humans to destroy her kingdom and mocks her for it. Before, and I can't say this enough, freaking dissolving her body. Honestly, work. Everyone in power is an arrogant fool, and when they get too big for their britches, Erebos wants to see them get put in their place. We still don't know his entire reason for seducing humans the way he does. I certainly believe he has a genuine fixation with them. Maybe he respects and admires them. Maybe he simply doesn't fear them. But even before he gets locked away, he works through people. Ripples depicts Erebos' descent to Earth, becoming the fallen star. The sky opened its maw and spat from its black jaws a tiny star. The falling star plummeted down and down and down until it struck the breathless world below. With its impact came a long and terrible night. The earth bled. With its impact, a sea forms where there was none. And when a human touches the surface of the water, ripples form and distort the dazzling reflection of the stars. Literal or not, this is clearly Erebos' perception of the dichotomy between the hubristic and the humble, the stars and humankind, gods and their subjects. In another story, Erebos vividly recalls the experience of eating an apple given to him by a human. Besides furthering the satanic imagery, at least in the minds of English speakers, it also gives us a sense of his internal drive. The moments that stick with him are those of humble human joys and actions, and displays of ugly vanity on the part of magic users. This really sums up my fascination with Erebos. He's defined by these terrible and sublime stories and actions, but always with the vague understanding of himself as the underdog. And he's not totally wrong either. As powerful as he is, he has repeatedly aligned himself with David, humankind. Erebos commits acts of extreme violence with a blithe smile, but to me this isn't indicative of an innate lack of empathy. To me, it feels more like an expression of his commitment to his goals, always with that fixation on arrogance. He has a firm understanding of how power works in his world, and every time he predicts someone's actions correctly, he gets further confirmation that he's in the right. And in a story that is thematically about investigating the reasons for violence, primarily the ways in which defense can be contorted into a need for aggression, it seems to me that Erebos' unique brand of violence offers something new and unique into the story. That assuredness, the aggression coming from a place of active hate rather than passive fear, is something that Viren and Claudia don't really have. Whatever his motives are, he's rooted in them. So, let's interrogate his motives. We haven't really seen his internal world explored yet, so we're just gonna look at his actions and see what we can intuit from there. So first and most obviously, he gave humans dark magic. Now, I've said this before in this series, but I'll just say it again, I don't understand the problem with dark magic. Listen, I'm about 90% a vegetarian. I'm not great at it, but I can understand the desire to not want to cause harm when unnecessary. So, killing magical beings, it's not my favorite thing, I'll grant you that. But it's super clear that magic is a material necessity in this world. We know of at least one instance when 100,000 human lives were saved because of magic. Imagine other instances where they weren't. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, humans were given primal stones, but clearly not enough to survive. Also, given the fact that at least one human can do primal magic, it seems like there was at some point a concerted effort to convince humans that they couldn't do primal magic. It's all very good to preserve the environment and protect creatures, but you can't do that at the expense of eating or defending yourself. The contempt you have to have for another person to deny them the right to continue living makes you at the very least a biased actor. You have no right to judge the worthiness of a person you deem unworthy of safety. Listen to the language Kessa uses to show her contempt for dark magic.
Your kind could not be satisfied with what you are given.
Doesn't that just make your blood boil? In this moment, I felt a weird sort of solidarity with humanity, in their world and in mine. The story of our world is one of clawing our way out of the darkness, staggering with every step forward and slipping as we're dragged back into the mud. Because even on this beautiful, amazing planet, our existence has been about misery and the fight to escape misery. We have to eat life forms to survive, and I think our psychology is influenced by this innate cruelty that we're all forced to live by. Being a human is not easy, and we weren't given anything by anyone. I feel that we are supposed to understand this statement as emblematic of the unique anti-human bigotry Zadians are taught to believe. Consider, Sol Regum kills an entire city of humans in order to stop one guy from doing what is essentially hunting. The guy blinds him, again, in an effort to stop a genocide from occurring, but fails, and the people are burned alive. And the consequence of this is that humans get displaced for the crime of being subjected to a holocaust. Look how devalued the lives of human beings are. Humans have been subjected to a deeply ingrained system of violence on the part of the powerful. This society is not equal in power, and so you can't hold humanity equally culpable for doing dark magic as you would hold a dragon for killing civilians en masse. So, Erebos hands them a meal ticket, and humans have to take it. Tell me what I'm missing, because that literally just seems like praxis to me. There is some indication in Ripples that Erebos somehow gave humans primal magic. Humans are said to have been given a gift that they shouldn't have had. Then we are told they nurtured their precious primal flames secretly, as cultivating its glow drew the eyes and ire of monsters. For the audacity of their fire, they were hunted. And that's when Erebos fell. So, it looks like Erebos is punished for somehow giving humans primal magic. And, having been cast down, he begins giving them dark magic. It seems like he tried to do the right thing, and that got him exiled, and made humans a target. So, what was left? He aligns himself with the beings he has more or less become responsible for at this point. He gives them new means of providing for themselves, but obscures his own involvement. Doesn't let on that he's protecting them, because that went very poorly for him before. In a way, this Goliath has found himself on the side of David, and they really need his help. So, it seems like a foregone conclusion that things like fairness and justice are among his most compelling motivators. Hand in hand with this, we have the recurring theme of humiliation and arrogance. He's cast from the heavens, and it mortifies him. His place in the hierarchy is shaken. So he resents those at the top, calls them arrogant, and sets to work turning their pride against them. His second set of actions is following and aiding Viren, which is transparently an attempt to get out of prison. Which, bro, he's been in isolation for 300 years. Fun fact, that's torture. In countries like Belgium, Germany, and Sweden, it isn't even illegal to try to escape prison. It's considered a fundamental part of humanity to want to be free. Even here in Freedom Town, USA, we generally don't put people in solitary confinement for literal years. It does happen, don't get me wrong. But when it does, we see it as a horrific crime. Alfred Woodfox was in solitary confinement for 42 years, which is thought to be the longest stretch of solitary confinement in American history. And if that number, 42 years, doesn't fill you with rage, well, hopefully you're in the minority. And Erebos has one means of escape, becoming useful to someone on the outside. And that someone just so happens to be interested in conquering Zadia. Which is pretty convenient, because Erebos seems to be interested in that too.
Is your wish to rule Zadia? So, you wish to conquer Zadia? And this bright future will require us to conquer Zadia?
So, why? Well, revenge seems to be a good place to start, but that only tells me that he's a messy bitch who lives for drama, and if we're being honest, I kind of already assumed that. So let's find something more interesting. Yes, he wants revenge, but think about the method and style of his revenge. His vehicle for revenge is a human, a dark mage no less, and he didn't even have to find him, he sort of fell in his lap. How poetic.
Oh, the irony is wonderful.
So he makes himself indispensable to Viren, offers to serve him, a great one. Once an exemplar of all a magical being could be, at the right hand of a human who does perverted magic. He finds liberation and joy serving a human, even though he's aware of his power over him. In one moment, he's calling Viren his vessel, and in the next, he offers him a staff like it's a scepter. He allows himself to be ruled by one whom he considers to be inferior. And while this is all very practical, it also seems to speak to his ideas and his sense of self. The subversion in and of itself is an act of destruction. He destroys the expected hierarchy of powerful over powerless. Through conquest, he continues the destruction, trying to kill a baby dragon, which will go on to be the next arrogant monster, killing a queen for daring to purify a human who has done what he could to survive. His sense of justice, and his hatred for a system that has continuously denied it to its most vulnerable, tells me that he probably came to his current worldview through a genuine position of kindness, which was transformed through ostracism. I want to add that the desire for correction or revenge is a bit more viscerally justifiable than we might be led to believe. Like, I'm not saying he's this freedom fighter whose evil actions happen to be totally woke if you really think about it. No, he is not just fighting for justice on behalf of others. There is every indication that Erebos has very good reasons for turning against the political elite among dragons and elves. The actions of the people who imprisoned him are monstrous, especially for a show as grounded in modern sensibilities as the Dragonprince. They essentially prosecuted and sentenced him without a trial, and no chance to explain himself. Maybe in a myth I'd be more sympathetic, if this was a detached telling of a story that began long ago, but we are very much present in this world. We hear from a number of living beings who can remember when this all went down. No one is talking in these and thous. Erebos is a character we have seen with our own eyes. He's not Sisyphus, whose life and punishment feel remote. It's all too grounded for us to sincerely believe that Erebos deserved to be summarily imprisoned without recourse. Even if this was a protective measure, this feels much more like a kidnapping than a justified imprisonment. The evil deeds of our boy Erebos are almost laughably vague.
Every great crisis the world faced seemed the work of some ingenious and powerful leader. But in each case, it was secretly Erebos, whispering in their ear.
Every great crisis? What, every famine? Every time some guy burned down a country because some dude looked at his wife? Sol Regum incinerated 100,000 people, including children. Did Erebos orchestrate that too? This is a profoundly stupid thing to say, and I can only assume that it is a retrospective justification for their actions. Or maybe just an absolution of what seems to be a really cowardly and avoidant way of dealing with real problems. Whispering in someone's ear, whatever that means, isn't a crime. People are responsible for their own actions. The stories of Viren and Claudia demonstrate how tragically important that principle is. They live in a world where every evil deed they do feels necessary, righteous even, and we can empathize with them. But they are still accountable for their actions, regardless of what or who influenced them. Of the three big antagonists of the show, Erebos is the only one not offering excuses or justifications for his actions. He seems almost free of any need for it. It's like he's working outside of small-minded schematic frameworks where actions need to have moral worth in a sort of external way. If he doesn't need to convince anyone of his strength, maybe he doesn't need to convince anyone of his goodness either. Maybe he's just so evil that he enjoys doing things that he knows are wrong. Or maybe he's the only one with a moral code so close to being perfect that he has no need for endless affirmations. Maybe now you can see why I'm half excited and half wary of whatever the next 2 seasons have planned. If our cast is really deluded into believing that all of the complexities of cruelty and mistrust and anger and dread and loneliness can be boiled down to a pretty boy whispering into the ears of powerful people, that can lead to some good shit. What if our heroes are wrong and our villains right? What if Erebos actually has something to teach them? Wouldn't that be the coolest possible outcome for this show to have? Our heroes are persuaded by him, and the world ends up being all the better for it? It seems to me like this is the logical thematic conclusion for a show like The Dragonprince. So far, we've built immense empathy for our human villains, but never been invited to hear how their perspectives could be incorporated into the social fabric of a better world. Viren's voracious hunger for recognition isn't distinct from the generational issues of humanity being degraded for centuries, but a natural byproduct of it. Claudia's desperation to keep her family together and whole and safe feels like the most intimate expression of how cruel an unjust world can be. Not just hurting you, but pulling away those you love. Erebos is an angry outcast for extending kindness outside of his in-group. What might our heroes learn from that? Of course, the more excited I feel, the less likely this possibility sounds. Even Steven Universe made its bad guys evil, even if it went on to reform them ludicrously fast. I don't know, I'm not good at telegraphing the ideas of other writers. Maybe they are just setting him up to be super Hitler. When Zubeia said that stupid fucking line in season 4,
whispering in their ear,
my first thought was, this literally has the potential to break the show. Viren is one of the best antagonistic forces I've ever seen. The show is just relentless in its dissection of him. But at the end of season 5, even he is talking about dark magic as if it's the problem, which is the same stupid bullshit that Harrow was saying in season 1. But the problem, dear viewers, lies not in the stars, but in ourselves. Didn't you know that? I'm not blaming you, it's the show. What, are we going to absolve every character from every bad thing they've ever done? Is Viren no longer responsible for his bad deeds? I can't help but think that Harrow was fundamentally flawed in his assessment of dark magic in the first season, and Sarai too. The idea that dark magic is essentially bad because it's a shortcut that incurs a blood price sounds like superstitious nonsense to me. It may be bad, there are essential evils in the world, but it's bad for reasons that can't be metaphysically philosophized away. It's the harm that you did to another being. You chose to kill the magma titan to save lives. Sometimes you have to choose one evil over another. The idea that dark magic is the only evil at play is to take a moral shortcut on your own behalf. You have to reckon with the morality of the actions you've taken. These layers of moral obfuscation are very concerning to me. It's this odd idea that evil is some ultimate conscious thing that abuses us, rather than a ubiquitous thing that manifests through our actions, whispering in their ear. That line really pissed me off. In the very beginning of this series on the Dragonprince, I talked about my definition of themes. They are the windows through which we can viscerally and emotionally understand a story. Themes are the level of text at which we can see real life being imitated. We don't have magic, and these characters never existed, but we have violence and injustice and death. And when we see these lifelike concepts being synthesized in the trance of story, we feel tension and catharsis. And what I'd like to leave you with is a reminder that themes are the mechanisms stories use to communicate with us. Not always to deliver a cheesy Aesop, that's not what I'm saying. But they offer up observations of the world that the writer wants you to consider, or at least meditate on for a while. When a theme communicates a message that we can understand, we feel enlightened and surprised. And when it doesn't, we feel cheated out of a good conversation, as if the ideas that the piece conjured in our minds weren't actually worth discussing. The antagonists of the Dragonprince are so clear in their attempts to communicate with us. I can't help but want to throw them a lifeline, even defend them on some level. Even Erebos, whose actions seem so joyfully cruel, inspires understanding and compassion. These guys are really well written, and the three of them enrich the show immeasurably. But a conversation is only ever as good as its ending, which is why a disappointing finale can feel so awful. So I guess the message is, get your petitions to redo the finale ready early. I have yet to hear a shippy name for Justin Richmond and Aaron A. Hodge, so I have taken it upon myself to come up with Arston. I think that's kinda cute. Petition for Arston to prematurely redo the final 2 seasons of The Dragonprince, but only after watching this series. That's a very important part. I got a really nice comment on my video series on the Dragonprince, and I'm gonna reward it. Keep them coming. I had oddly weak feelings about Season 6 of the Dragonprince, and that's pretty unfortunate. There was stuff I liked. I enjoyed the Raylam's slow reburn. I liked those blindfolded psychonauts in the Starscraper. I liked Kareem as a black Nazi, that was fun. I liked the wedding. I liked the Soren, Corvus, Zubeia love triangle. It's happening. Don't argue with me. And yet, I can't help but feel like the gears of this story are getting all gunked up. I really disliked the first full scene of the show where it's revealed that Claudia has killed Sir Sparklepuff. Mainly because I had felt so smart for thinking that Claudia losing her leg would constitute the whole blood of child thing. And now that just seems like a horrific thing that happened to her for no other reason other than to make me feel stupid. The scene kicked off my viewing experience with a particularly bad taste in my mouth. In my video series on the antagonists of the Dragonprince, I said that Viren's choosing to die was both a selfless act of love and a destructive and idiotic and profoundly unhelpful thing to do to his daughter. He claims to have misled her all her life, and then he chooses to die, leaving her without leadership. It was a terrible decision, but I kinda liked it. It was tragic, it felt dramatically right, and it was slightly funny to me, because Viren was trying to do something good, but was too dumb to learn from his mistakes. That's great, it was complicated. It felt good to watch. Viren was never going to redeem himself, I don't think, because his fatal flaw was loving people and wanting to be loved by them. But he did resolve his own internal conflict by choosing to die. He let go of his need to protect his children through force and gave them freedom from his influence, trusting them to find the right path on their own. But in Season 6, this resolution is denied, delayed, and then redone far less effectively later on. So Viren wakes up, has an uncomfortably cuddly moment with Terry. Don't know why this scene makes me so uncomfortable, but I don't like it. Terry, he hasn't brushed his teeth in 2 years. Back away. Viren then awkwardly exposits that he is, in fact, alive.
I am alive!
You are alive!
Thanks for that. And also that he's free. free from dark magic, I suppose, though I don't understand why, and having characters simply announce where they are in their internal journeys makes me feel like I'm being beaten over the head with a cast iron pan, but okay. And then it's revealed that Claudia has killed Sir Sparklepuff and done the blood ritual to bind Viren back to life. And this means that Viren isn't as free as he wants to be. This is for 2 reasons. 1, he was counting on the fact that Erebos had lied to him about needing the blood of his child to bind him back to life. It sure would make it easy to put all the moral blame for his actions onto Erebos, wouldn't it? Which is a criticism I actually made in my Erebos video. You should watch it. It would be great if Viren could simply say Erebos was a liar and move on. But Erebos wasn't lying. He made a fair bargain with Claudia and he held up his end.
But Erebos helped us. He followed through on everything he said he was going to do to save my dad.
Viren isn't free because he cannot shift the moral burden onto another. 2, Viren can't choose whether or not he'll be brought back to life by dark magic, because he already made his bet on that front. He taught Claudia to serve his needs without question. He's put her in direct contact with Erebos, he's given her the education to bring him back, whether or not he consents. He was free. Now he's chained to the consequences of his actions. So Viren's all happy, and then he gets slapped in the face with the reality of the situation. He laments that he has led Claudia down a dark path, and claims that he should set a new example for her. And then he fucking abandons her as he screams and cries.
No!
It's just so... God damn it, Viren. This is just a worse version of abandoning her by choosing to die. Like, at least dying has this sense of self-sacrifice to it, and she can interpret it however she wants after you're dead. In this instance, he's just like, I'm gonna go have this child hold me accountable for my actions because I don't know how to do it on my own. So I'm gonna go. You can't stop me because you can't walk. Because you just lost a leg trying to keep me alive, but I'm gonna leave. Good luck with that. Bye. And she's like, Dad, you're triggering my abandonment issues. And he's like, bye, pumpkin. Bye, pumpkin. Bye, pumpkin. Bitch, you look like a fucking man and you need that facelift. Oh, you want a family? Oh, you want a compassionate father figure? Is that what you want? Because let me tell you, you're never gonna get it. Viren, fuck you, dude. So, Viren did not redeem himself to me personally. I don't understand the epiphany that Viren has had. I don't understand what he thinks he's learned. This is truly horrible. He's once again convinced himself he's doing the right thing while hurting his kid. And completely outsourcing his responsibility for atoning for his crimes to Ezrin, a kid. He winds up sitting around in a dungeon waiting for someone to come up to him to tell him how to redeem himself. Which brings us to the long-awaited reunion between Viren and Soren. I mean, I was waiting for it for a long-ass time. I liked watching Soren deal with Viren. He felt both in character and appropriately out of character in a really good way. On the one hand, bringing him his meals makes him seem very nurturing and loving, which, yeah, you would expect someone like Soren to act like that. And on the other, there's a fantastic moment where Soren blows up at Viren. Jesse Inokala does a fantastic job bridging together the confusion and the anguish and the anger, and the quick shot of Soren turning and grabbing the bars was fantastically animated. The sequence where Viren is writing Soren a letter just felt very bizarre to me. Viren recalls a moment where he told Harrow,
If it's love, then nothing else matters.
And this is what sent Viren into his downward spiral. So we get the backstory that readers of the novels were already aware of. Soren was a sick child, and Viren was willing to kill for him, and he kind of does. Viren gathers all of the ingredients to save Soren's life, and the last thing he needs comes from Soren's mother, and she's like, no. Huh? He has everything there. All she has to do is cry into a vial, and then her toddler son gets to live. And she's like, ew, you're wrinkly, get away from me. Speechless. I don't even know. He recounts doing essentially domestic violence against her. And that's bad. Not as bad as letting your baby son die. Like, you can't make me viscerally identify with Soren's mother here because, like, she's objectively in the wrong, right? Imagine if she was a Christian Scientist refusing to give her child a blood transfusion. That's where my mind goes. I'm thinking, this weird spiritual belief that I don't even agree with is gonna prevent you from doing your first and most fundamental job as a parent, which is to keep your children alive? The show is trying to spell out the immorality of Viren's actions, but I'm somehow left with a conclusion that everyone but Viren is an obstinate asshole, and Viren genuinely has to drag them kicking and screaming to the correct way of doing things. Before this moment, I was sufficiently convinced that Viren was a villain with some redemptive qualities, but this story is the thing that's making me rethink that, which is insane, because as we just spoke about, it comes off the heels of the scene where I've basically just been convinced that he's an asshole, abandoning his daughter. So I hate him, and he's the only one capable of doing the right thing. What is happening? How have you done this? What is this? What are you doing? Help me. My brain is bleeding. And then he writes that while he was able to save his son, the cost of this act was devastating. And it's implied that the cost was his wife leaving the family. What the fuck? The cost of his child getting to live into adulthood is that the parent who was unwilling to give her tears to save said child fucking abandons her kids. Honestly, Viren, you made out like a bandit. You won. Claudia, I'm sorry it was traumatic for you. Soren, I'm sorry your dad is a blue-balled loser. But yeah, parents should stop their children from dying. Hot take. I've been talking about this for too long. That all said, I kind of liked how Viren actually died. I wish he died in the season 5 finale. That would have been better to me, but whatever. It was dramatic, it was well animated, well acted. Jason Simpson has made the best out of some pretty rough dialogue in this season, and I think this scene gave him a chance to shine.
I am a servant. I am a servant.
His death scene, where he presumably redeems himself in the eyes of the writers, is an allusion both to the death of Ziard and also to Viren's own violence in order to save his son's life. So, 1. He dies in the exact same way that Ziard does, a dark mage doing dark magic for an altruistic, self-sacrificing reason. And 2. He dies suffering in the place of his son, which he also did all those years ago, which began his dark magic journey. And yet, this is a redemptive act. It's something that Soren tells him to do, after all. It's weird. I just saw the ending of The Umbrella Academy. Spoilers for The Umbrella Academy. If you don't want to be spoiled on literally the very last thing that happens in that show, skip ahead to a time code that I'll manifest. In Umbrella Academy, the main cast never should have been born, so they all have to sacrifice themselves and die. They got to live for a bit, it was miserable, now they die. According to that logic, Soren should have died here instead of Viren dying in his place. Soren was never supposed to make it to adulthood. Viren was, I guess, supposed to let him die, and therefore he needs to die now. I'm glad Soren didn't die, he shouldn't. Parents should sacrifice for their kids. But I gotta ask again, what has Viren learned? How is he meaningfully different than how he was in the very beginning of the story? Dark magic has always been symbolically tied to self-sacrifice. It harms the body of the user. Viren tries to offer to die in Harrow's place. On a subtextual level, this doesn't feel meaningfully different from his other uses of dark magic. So, with Viren out of the way, Erebos is officially the main antagonist of the show. Kareem may or may not be dead, but his army seems to have been handily taken out of commission, and Claudia's goals seem to have been subsumed by Erebos's. So, let's check in on Erebos. The most immediate of his goals has been accomplished. He's out of prison. What remains to be determined is how the heroes will react to his freedom, and what he intends to do with it. Mystery of Erebos has been preoccupied with the question of whether Erebos should be murdered before he can break out of prison.
Ooh, how about this? we form a Fellowship of the Pearl. Take a long journey across the world together and throw it into a volcano.
Come here. Come here. Come on. Closer. Stop referencing other stories. Stop. Just stop it. Just stop doing it. Stop doing it. It fucks with the tone of the scene. It reminds me I'm watching a high fantasy show for children, and they're not funny. Why is episode 7 called The Red Wedding? Are you fucking... Whatever. So, Erebos poses a challenge to the main characters. How should they respond now that he's out? Well, hopefully before they can do anything else, they learn a bit about Erebos' goals. Because I gotta say, I might be rooting for Erebos. The protection of children is a big part of this season, as we've discussed. It ties together the motifs of childhood and fear that we've spoken of throughout the show and this series. I've gone on and on about how Viren's recollection of holding down his wife and forcefully collecting her tears is undercut by the fact that she is refusing to save her son's life. I can understand the visceral aversion to dark magic, but the idea that it is so horrible that you aren't willing to do a simple act to save your child's life is just very alien to me. As for Erebos, now that I know his full story, I don't know how I'm not supposed to just be supporting him. I'm like, honey, you better kill anybody who gets in your way. Whoever fucks with you, just take him out. His daughter was murdered for doing the same shit I defended Erebos for in my video on him. Like, I think I'm just fully on his side now. Let's dive into the scene where this little girl, Leola, is on trial for helping humans not die. So, first of all, her father wasn't even told where she was. She was essentially kidnapped while playing with another kid, and she was swooped up without her parent being told. Erebos chases them down in time to speak for her, but is told that she isn't innocent because she stands accused. Stop right there. Maybe I'm just red, white, and blue pilled, but why does being accused of something make her not innocent? The fact that one witness saw her commit a crime is sufficient for getting a child executed on sight is just wild to me. This feels like the cosmic order is being enforced by the mafia or something. It feels so deeply... It's like reading The Trial by Kafka. If you've read that book and you know how it ends, like, that's how deeply broken this feels to me. Also, you want to hear a fun thing I learned on the wiki? So, Erebos' prison is nestled inside this little cavernous part of the sea, surrounded by a skeleton. That skeleton is the remains of Leola. Yeah. They imprisoned Erebos in the bodily remains of his dead child. Am I in hell? This is so poetically cruel. It's really more accurately described as perverse. So here's the effect that this cumulatively has on me. When Terry says this...
The story we just heard, maybe it started as a story of love. Along the way, it got twisted. He isn't doing anything for love. He's doing it for revenge.
Terry, I love you. But at a certain point, revenge has a social utility. Remember, Leola violated the cosmic order. There was no greater authority for Erebos to appeal to stop the injustice. In the absence of there being literally no correct way of dealing with this, it's a foregone conclusion that the system is inviting retribution. At a certain point, the question of, is Erebos justified in his actions, just dissolves. He's doing the thing that a living being does when all options are taken from them. There was nothing else to do except do nothing. Prescribing that he do nothing means that this bullshit can happen again. What's the alternative, bro? There's an unexpected scene at the other end of the story that really frustrates me in contrast with this story of Erebos. Rayla and Callum are about to kiss, but they interrupt themselves to promise each other that they will each let the other die rather than allow the other to serve a dark purpose. This is the closest affirmation we ever get by the characters that love is a direct catalyst for violence and evil and death. And yet, the climactic moment of Callum's arc is refilling his darkened heart with light. Remember, his heart is darkened after doing dark magic 2 times to save Rayla. So, how does he fix himself? You're gonna have a stroke. It's literally Rayla, the one he loves. The reason he did dark magic both times. Am I just stupid? I meant what I said at the beginning. I'm rooting for these two. They're very cute. I love love. However, why is love the ultimate anchor for goodness in Callum's arc, yet the root of all evil for the 3 main antagonists? Do we expect Callum to let Rayla die after these scenes? It's not impossible. Maybe they really are just burying the lead very deeply. Maybe Callum will genuinely have to sacrifice her. But what would a satisfying sacrificial death even look like? The final season comes out on December 19th, so I will try to reserve judgment for 2 more months. In the meantime, petition for arson to prematurely redo the final 2 seasons of The Dragonprince, but only after watching this series. I'm serious. This video is brought to you by me. You're welcome. I think about stories a lot, almost constantly. I'm not sure where I am right now. Point is, if you're writing a story and you need some help, you can hire me. I consult on screenplays, write serialized fiction, and yes, I write scripts for YouTube professionally. That's right, you're looking at a pro. Don't check my sub count. You can go to my website to check out my portfolio, read my reviews, look at my prices, and reach out for a chat about how I can help with your project. By the way, question, genuine question, not rhetorical. The line from the very beginning, plus the trailers, we are all stardust, held together by love for an instant. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Genuine question, not rhetorical. When I first heard it in the trailer, I was convinced that they were quoting Carl Sagan. And I was like, oh, that's cute. They're quoting Carl Sagan. And then I looked it up, and Carl Sagan never said that. And then I looked it up with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he didn't say it either. I figured one of them must have said it. But no, neither of them said it. And now I'm wondering if I'm living in like an alternate reality where I don't have an ending to this joke, but I'm driving myself crazy and I need help. Has anyone heard this before the trailer came out for season 6? I'm sorry to have taken so much of your time. Jewish oral Torah tells the story of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, a particularly brilliant but obstinate member of the Sanhedrin, which is a democratic body of rabbis that makes determinations on religious law. There are no more prophets running around, so these rabbis are tasked with adapting the laws of the written Torah to modern issues, using hermeneutics to interpret the Word of God. Rabbi Eliezer, a genius though he was, had trouble wrapping his mind around this interpretation thing, particularly when it came to the majority rules nature of the Sanhedrin. The story goes that a problem is brought before the Sanhedrin, something concerning a new kind of oven. All the rabbis determine that the oven can become ritually impure, with only Rabbi Eliezer arguing the opposite. The Sanhedrin is a democratic body, majority rules, and Rabbi Eliezer should accept their decision, regardless of his own opinion. But he can't. He knows he's right. In frustration, he cries out, "If it's as I say, this carob tree will prove it." Miraculously, the tree springs out of the earth and begins to run on its roots far away. But the other rabbis roll their eyes. They're like, how exactly does that prove your point? Rabbi Eliezer, blind with righteous anger, yells again, "If it is as I say, this stream will prove it." The rabbis watch as the currents of the stream cease, and begin to flow backwards. It's miraculous. But, the other rabbis explain, one can't cite the movements of a stream as proof in matters of religious law. Come on, man. This is getting embarrassing. Rabbi Eliezer is straight up having a panic attack by this point. "If it's as I say, the walls of the study hall will prove it." Immediately, the walls of the room crack. The seams between the rock tear apart from each other, and it begins to tumble down. But another rabbi scolds the walls of the study hall. "How dare you interfere in a scholarly debate? Stay out of this." Rabbi Eliezer has never heard the definition of insanity. He cries out one last time, "If it is as I say, heaven will prove it." A voice like thunder racks the crumbling walls of the study hall and bears down on the other rabbis. In all matters of religious law, the truth is always in accordance with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. There. It's entirely unambiguous now. You can't cite a carob tree in matters of religious law, but surely you can cite the voice of heaven. And yet, Rabbi Joshua ben Hanania responds, "The Torah is not in heaven." The significance of this sentence is not lost on Rabbi Eliezer. It's from the Torah. It is not in heaven that you should say, "Who will go up to heaven for us, and get it for us, that we may hear it and observe it?" Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, "Who will cross to the other side of the sea for us, and get it for us, that we may hear it and observe it?" No, the word is very near to you. It is in your mouth and in your heart for you to observe. Rabbi Joshua reminds Rabbi Eliezer that the Torah was given to them so that they could find truth themselves and act accordingly, not so that they could rely on God to tell them exactly what to think and how to behave. He uses the words of God to appropriately take issue with God's commands, effectively spoken through Rabbi Eliezer. Upon hearing Rabbi Joshua's response, God smiles and says, "My children have triumphed over me." It may have once been the case that miracles and prophets could offer up ultimate truths to humanity, that truth didn't require struggle and doubt. But that time has passed, and truth is a bit more complicated. It's difficult to do good without doing bad, and just as often, overwhelmingly bad things lead to some unmistakable bit of good that makes the bad thing worthwhile. The struggle with truth doesn't make you stupid. We aren't stupider now that reality needs to be inspected with greater care. It is, in my opinion, a mark of our maturity as a species that good and bad and truth and falsehood are trickier to pinpoint.
Oh my god, what is that? Oh my god! What is that?
Magic! What the hell is it, and why can't I shut up about it? Is it a reified form of psychic processes that destabilizes our capitalistic notions of individuality? Or is it a rigidly ordered mine of unparalleled energy that we can exploit to systematically colonize every inch and facet of our lived reality? No, it's the first one. I spent much of last year thinking about the politics of magic. This started with an exploration of the Dragonprince, which I discovered at the beginning of 2024. I immediately devoured 5 seasons of the show and began making videos about it just a month later. I simply couldn't stop myself. I seemed to never run out of things to say about this show that I felt offered up genuine social critiques through its themes in a way that I'd never seen a child-centric show do. And then, at the end of the year, we got our second and final season of Arcane. I was a casual fan of season 1 and decided I'd contribute a review of the season when it came out. That review is on Animation for Adults if you're interested. In keeping with the first season, I was more or less content with the second half of the show, with some notable exceptions, and yet there was one particular aspect of the show that kept me returning to the topic over and over again. Both of these shows use magic as a way of shaking up social hierarchies. They each create a ton of avenues for exploring how social hierarchies react when their underclasses achieve the means to fight back. But neither manages to do this. So that's why we're here today. We're about to talk about these 2 finales and the shows that preceded them, as well as the theme of social unrest. But before that, I'd like to offer a preamble that some viewers might find helpful. And I do mean offer. You can take it or leave it. It's right over here, in its own separate video for your convenience. We're about to talk a lot about themes, and indeed much of my channel homes in on the themes of story in a way that some people find a little too abstract for their liking. So, in this little guy over here, I explain exactly why I care so much about themes and why we can't have the in-depth discussions that I would like to have without them. If that context would help you digest this video, feel free to click the little guy. Otherwise, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Both the Dragonprince and Arcane wrapped up their final seasons, hopefully, within a month of each other. And both left me with the frustration of unhad conversations. I was particularly upset with the ending of The Dragonprince. I was once told that some stories raise thematic questions it already knows the answers to, and others ask questions that will be explored throughout the course of the story. Is the story willing to open its mind to the audience, challenge itself, challenge the truths it takes for granted in a public setting where they can be scrutinized? Sometimes you see the struggle with truth, and sometimes it feels distinctly painted over. It is perhaps this distinction that defines a mature story from an immature one. Arcane had no interest in dissecting its own beliefs. It was going to be against messing with the natural order no matter what. And it telegraphed that right from the start. Even when the natural order includes suffering and subjugation, even when unstable variables external to the natural world can tangibly make things better, that which is external should never interfere with the world as it is. We're told so throughout the first season. Heimerdinger is treated as a Cassandra whose grim prophecies are not heeded. Victor is more of an Icarus, with his hubris leading to his downfall. Mel's politicking toward the reckless pursuit of technological progress is always framed as sinister, even when we sympathize with her. Just about every element of Season 1 is telling you that pursuing magic is wrong, rather than directing the audience to come to that conclusion themselves. Howdy fellas, I made a few mistakes, so I'm coming back in to fix them. Rather than directing the audience to come to that conclusion themselves, yes. But also, rather than allowing their starting position to be meaningfully challenged. The show offers an argument with two sides, to hextech or not to hextech, and by the end, its starting position is completely unaltered. Might as well have not challenged the premise in the first place. The drive toward progress is innately destructive. The arcane is Pandora's box. Don't open it. It is the second season's ineptitude in actually expressing why it's asserting that claim that makes it so crunchy to talk about for me. It doesn't feel curious about its own beliefs, it feels defensive of them. Like, they want to make their point so badly, but they can't contend with the implications of their own text when it starts to contradict them, which is why they need to introduce multiple realities to prove their point. Magic was bad the whole time! Look at these other realities that we just made up, guys! The show believes in its thesis too strongly to ever allow an antithesis to meaningfully alter its starting position. This rigid thesis causes characters to get continuously derailed from exploring the nature of the arcane more fully. We learn a bit about wild runes, that magic is its own ambiguously conscious substance that doesn't like being controlled by human hands. To me, this sounds like an eminently workable problem. You can create an entire field of study around learning how to work with the arcane, rather than bending it to your will. It's almost comically easy to convince Jace and Victor that hextech is suddenly completely invalid. Victor particularly has a very strange switch in motives in Season 1. As the requisite speaker of on-the-nose observations, he says that, "In pursuit of great, we fail to do good." This is an insane thing to say after killing someone by accident. His pursuit of the great didn't lead to Sky's death. A freak accident did. He was almost annoyingly responsible and conscientious with his actions leading up to her death. He didn't test his research on other subjects, he took the experimental medicine by himself, and he waited for everyone to leave the office. If Victor's really pursuing great to the exclusion of doing good, you kinda just have to go for it at some point. Show him experimenting on an animal like Singed, or have him actually experimenting on Sky. You can even show him manipulating her feelings for him, because it's all for the greater good. Do something to prove to me that Victor has intentionally done something for which he needs to redeem himself. Prove to me that his pursuit cannot result in good. But you aren't supposed to think that deeply about it, because if you do, you'll realize that the arcane itself is no more the problem than gas-powered engines are in our world. You can kill someone with a car, you can hurt the ecosystem, you can bring the whole world to the edge of climate catastrophe, but it's not the car that's the problem. The car can be used responsibly or irresponsibly, for good or for bad. The problem is always you, the people who act recklessly and callously, and the random happenings of chance that lead to suffering. It takes a level of maturity to accept that the world sometimes gets a little bit better, even as it gets more dangerous. And this show is not particularly mature. Arcane never wanted to seriously examine what magic means in a world with such a deep class disparity. What defines hubris and why is it bad? When is the relief of suffering worth the cost of long-term complications of progress? If magic doesn't equalize a society, what does? Apparently, the answer is heavenly robots. If the poor people would just agree to throw their bodies into danger while the elite look at maps and engage in very mannered dueling, equality could be achieved. Vi has to carry the dead in her arms while dodging bullets, while Mel gets to hold her dying mother, and none of these hardened zealots are going to interfere, because this is the special battle for special people born into wealth and power. Well, everyone, society is solved. Honestly, should have known. And so, I was underwhelmed but largely unsurprised by Arcane's weak ending. I was a little surprised and entertained by the hoops it jumped through to attempt to make it work, but the frustration of a shitty ending was expected. It was the Dragonprince's ending that really kind of broke my heart, despite being a kid's show with lots of poop jokes, and one inexplicable joke about semen. I had inadvertently given myself a lot more hope that this show would tackle the questions it asked, rather than awkwardly maneuvering its plot around to match conclusions they'd come to long before they wrote the ending. And it disappointed me. In many, many ways.
Oh my No!
Not only did this season hunker down on its bad politics that I felt sure it would inevitably critique, the season was just bad. There were numerous scenes where the actors sounded like they were being held at gunpoint.
What, is she not good enough for you?
Sorry, what happened?
He'd been acting so strange, and he was arguing with my dad a lot.
I'm so sad and heartbroken for you.
There's straight up stagnant concept art in the foreground of several shots, and the camera just keeps cutting to it for some reason. Environments don't look fully finished, like maybe the lighting wasn't rendered correctly. The show has never been a feast for the eyes or anything, but it was always competent. This season is also boring to the point of utter listlessness. They keep doing this thing where they jump back and forth between two bland and lethargic scenes of endless talking. The very first episode cuts back to a boring-ass expositional conversation between Erebos, Claudia, and Terry like 3 or 4 times, during which time the sun rises from dawn to mid-morning, which makes you feel like you've been sitting around watching these idiots talk for several hours. And the scene it's sharing airtime with is a depressing, empty, grieving scene where the humans sit around mourning the loss of Catullus for apparently several hours. The characters might care, but the audience doesn't, because we have no sense of the suffering. There are no bodies, no injured refugees, no blood or fire. This is the first episode of the final season. Why am I being encouraged to take a nap in the first 15 minutes? The tension of the season effectively doesn't begin until episode 5, at the end of which our heroes learn that Erebos has returned. He's not up to anything in particular, but he's returned. An episode later, he completes one of the lamest evil plans I've ever seen, put a pin in that, and then immediately gets his corporeal vessel murdered because he turns his back on an archer who he knows is there. And then he gets captured by a 13-year-old who just learned that he was free a few hours prior. Like, Erebos doesn't even run away. He's got giant, long, sexy legs that go on for days, and he just stands there while a bunch of humans shoot him in the face with firecrackers. And then they trip him because he has the stupidity to keep getting closer to the exploding projectiles that are attacking his face. God damn it. However, by far the worst decision this season makes is this.
The West wasn't barren at all. Before the Mage Wars, the land was the same as all of Zadia. The mages became warlords. Their armies scoured the lands for magic and bled it dry. The wars only stopped when there was nothing left to fight for. All the magical resources were consumed or destroyed.
Yikes. This is an even lazier equivalent of Arcane's little "the multiverse will prove that we were right all along" shtick. So, as I've discussed in my other Dragonprince videos, this show did a good amount of subtextual work in its early seasons to portray humans as an oppressed minority. They're a diaspora population sent to a foreign land that we are led to believe is quite barren. Is it by divine providence that humans have no connection to magic? No, the story tells us, because Callum actually exceeds an assumed limit imposed upon him by those with the power of magic on their side. He learns 2 Arcanum, while most elf mages can only understand 1. Something was keeping humans from understanding magic, but it wasn't biology, clearly. The pain of humanity is something that was done to them, and they have to struggle with the assumed limits to overtake them. The human spirit is no less profound than the elf's spirit, but our depth is in our limits, and the struggle to surpass them. Maybe it was wrong of Harrow to kill the magma titan to save 100,000 people, but just by doing it and regretting it later, he struggles against a boundary and overtakes it, setting down a story that his sons will have to interpret in the light of their own struggles. I felt that this suffering was really well represented through dark magic. Dark magic isn't divine, it doesn't draw power from innate pure power sources. It comes with a cost. Much is made in the first season about the need to pay the blood price for its use, but that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't use it. It means you should know the cost. And yet, in this one moment, a human proves to another human that human beings are the vulgar, greedy, base creatures that the elves believe that they are. When Karim says this,
"Your beliefs came from fear. Mine come from knowledge. You humans are vermin, a plague. You take and will not be satisfied until our history and culture are dust in the desert wind."
He's just straight up correct. It turns out that humans, in their insolent whining to the stars for rage and pain at their innate unworthiness, cause mass self-destruction, grief, and pain because we have no sense of refinement, no connection to the sublime or the ethereal. Uncultivated savages that strip the land of all beauty and nourishment without thought. If I have any Native American viewers, I'd be curious about your thoughts on this. One might be tempted to think that the writers were doing a little colonizers destroying native habitats shtick in a European to Native American allegory, but to me, it feels like the closest parallel statement is an implication that the natives were using the land wrong. Tell me what you think. Some people really are born with a tether to the numinous, and some are merely beasts with a clever aptitude for language. And which side you're on is determined by blood. It's not that all humans can access magic with proper instruction and self-discovery. Apparently someone in his bloodline had the pleasure of being fucked by an elf. Or some other magical creature. Probably a bird. Let's return to our boy Erebos. During his "we're just the same, you and I" villain speech with Ezrin, he makes a comment that I actually really resonated with. Actually, that should be no surprise to you if you've seen my other Dragonprince videos. Erebos is the main character of the Dragonprince. I dare you to prove me wrong. He has this habit of offhandedly making really thought-provoking statements that no one else can keep up with. Like, there's this one line where he says, "This world was made by cruel, unfeeling hands." And I just wrote in my notes, I really like Erebos. Like, go off, that's true, and he should say it, and it should be addressed. But that's not the line I was talking about.
What you taught those people was dark magic. You didn't save them, you corrupted them.
You call it corruption. I call it compromise. It is the nature of children to think the world must be one way or another. With maturity, we learn that most of life is lived in the space between. I merely helped humanity mature so they could be free. Wasn't that worth some compromise?
They're really hunkering down on the use of the term compromise, where I don't really think it fits. To be honest, it feels like they're hoping the use of the word compromise puts a bad taste in our mouths. Like, we'll think of Neville Chamberlain or the DNC, but a far better term in this situation would be bargain or trade. We're not leaving behind ideas of good and bad to meet somewhere in the middle. Rather, we're giving away moral assuredness for the slim chance at grasping at something beyond. Harrow can be morally assured that sharing the weight of suffering with Durin is good, but maybe there is a good beyond assuredness that may require more risk. Moving forward is a risk. Without God's word to tell us what is right, we have to triumph over God.
I'm actually a
magic man!
Magic!
Magic means a lot of things in different situations, but what intrigues me is the creativity of magic. You can immediately see why most organized religions reject and oppress their witches or magic practitioners. They would like to believe that only gods can make new things. And as powerful as the witch hunters are, and as brutal as the subjugation of the witches can be, the witches always win. Because they convince the witch hunter that they can rival God with their creativity. The witch hunter wouldn't waste time on the hunt unless the idea of magic had some power over them. Magic is so seductive because it posits that creativity actually lies in you. And through an equitable exchange with the world around you, you can bend the environment to your design. Creativity isn't confined to the realm of the divine. Of course, magic naturally slots into knowledge over time. Witchcraft practices often slot neatly into actual medicine. Witches essentially take it upon themselves to learn, not from a book written by another person, but from the world itself. They take it upon themselves to discover, and that invites some risk. In the major arcana, I just lost so many of you, whatever. In the major arcana, the card Temperance is followed by the Devil. Temperance is a principle that guides you into a new thought process or environment. If you just got a new job, you're not going to immediately rock the boat. You'll be temperate, you won't take risks. You'll keep your nose to the grindstone and work until you understand the ropes. As you learn, gain mastery over a discipline, you gain the ability to manipulate your surroundings. The devil loves a bargain, that's their thing. That's why they can buy a soul for pennies on the dollar. They know how to strike a deal. Gaining mastery, becoming powerful through learning, is what makes magic as a concept feel egalitarian. A paradigm of gods ruling humans naturally engenders hierarchy. Gods rule people who speak to gods, who rule people who serve gods, who rule people who rebel against gods. Or seem to, by virtue of having a uterus in most cases. Magic equalizes things. Through the trials of learning and taking risks and suffering through the consequences, you gain a power so much richer than the banal power that rests with the godly. Victor from Arcane, while having a frustrating mess of a character arc, was also kind of intriguing because of this. Jace is a well-off kid who infinitely fails upwards until he accidentally finds himself ruling an entire city-state. In contrast, Victor is a marginalized person with about 1 million disadvantages holding him back, but he gains mastery over magic due to curiosity and an obsessive drive to learn more. He hurts himself. He literally pours his blood into his work. He allows himself to fuse with it, annihilating himself and becoming something else. He takes risks, and he ends up being the most powerful being in the world. A far more interesting ending to me would involve wrestling with the nature of magic from the inside, from a place of intimate understanding. Victor is in some kind of ethereal plane by the end of his evolution. He's well placed to learn what the arcane wants. The idea that the arcane creates a kind of thoughtless stagnation, that it drives humanity toward a sterile form of perfection, is compelling on its own, but Victor's choice not to lean into this new, dreamless world isn't very interesting. It's obvious. Maybe there's a deal to be struck. Maybe the arcane can be introduced into the human world, but only if humanity is willing to fight the urge toward perfection. Imagine a world where humans put themselves through intentional trials, allowed themselves to struggle, and accepted the changes as they came. Just rejecting magic doesn't embrace the challenge. It wipes their hands of the need to face the issue. What if the arcane could only interact with technology if the inventor continuously made live sacrifices? Or the use of magic will always cause the user immense pain, even as it cures an illness. Maybe its mere existence in the human world shortens lives, but makes those lives a little less brutal and cruel. The range of possibilities widens. Pain and misery can be alleviated, but there is a greater risk that needs to be reckoned with every time. Don't just ignore the challenging thing. Face it and adapt. The world wasn't meant to stay exactly the same as it is right now. Forget about perfection, Victor. Magic is not the end of pursuit. It can be the pursuit itself, if approached mindfully. But Arcane did manage to make the loss feel great. In the end, while I think it was a rather boring way to explore magic, Victor has to give something up. There's a sacrifice. And that makes the ending of the show at least a bit more compelling than the end of the Dragonprince. So, back to Erebos' grand plan to buck against the cosmic order in tribute to his daughter's memory. What he comes up with is to unleash the undead hordes of purgatory into the living world, after which he will have to black out the sun in order to keep the dead animated perpetually. Not only is this a really obvious reference to the season 1 finale of Avatar, a show which has been referenced quite enough in this series, B, just a very lamely executed plan in terms of the danger posed by the dead. And C, is immediately undercut by Erebos getting his ass handed to him after this event on 2 separate encounters, but also, this is upending the cosmic order? There's one moment during the big battle where Zubeia is in anguish over Avazandum's zombie form killing Rex Igneous, and Erebos looks to the sky, ostensibly where the arbiters of cosmic justice reside, and says,
"Are you watching?"
No, Erebos, I don't think they are. I think they would have checked in by now if they were watching. They have proven that violence doesn't matter to them. They have esoteric rules by which they officiate the justice of the universe. And they don't seem to regularly get involved in individual incidents unless they somehow upend the cosmic order. Bringing the dead to life does vaguely ring true as a story of upending the natural order. All that lives must die, and we have a visceral aversion for mixing life and death. That's why zombies are so creepy. They're supposed to be dead, but they still act by some urge that we can't understand. It also kinda fits with his sort of allegiance to humanity, like, death affects humans, so maybe bringing the dead to life is kind of a way of helping the humans fight the cosmic order. Maybe? But why? Erebos is the devil. He likes a bargain. He furthers the work of his daughter by giving humans the tools to overcome the limits imposed upon them from on high. He doesn't do things for them. He doesn't corrupt them. Humans aren't powerless idiots. They are responsible for their own actions. You can call Erebos a liar or a manipulator or whatever, but all he can do in the end is make an offer. Humans are not victims when they choose to accept it. They knowingly and intentionally take on the sacrifice. That's the fun part about Viren. He is a servant. His body gets a little bit sicker and a little bit grosser every time he uses dark magic, and he still makes the choice over and over again. The loss is worth it for him. I got a little off track here, so I'm gonna jump back in. So, Erebos is the devil. He's the fallen star. He tempts humanity to rebel against God. You get it. That's what gets him in trouble in the first place. He's not supposed to be making these deals. He's not supposed to help humanity mature. So, does bringing the dead to life do that? Not in the slightest. Even using the dead as an army of bodies is weak as shit. Erebos is at his most powerful, effective, and entertaining when he's giving his enemies the rope to hang themselves with. He destroys Catullus from inside his prison just by giving Kareem the means to give Sol Regum the means to do the things that he would do already if given the opportunity. Very well played, Erebos. Your enemies are weakened now. Would have been even weaker if you'd managed to attack Catullus when the king was not on the other side of the continent, but you have to imagine that Ezrin's forces have been devastated by this. Sounds like a good time to take advantage and make an offer that will actually be difficult to refuse. But remember, the idea is to make the Star Touch elves hurt. So again, what offer can you make to humanity that is difficult to turn down and will hurt the keepers of cosmic justice? Humanity wants to be pure of its need for dark magic. At least the humans relevant to the finale do. It's strange to me that Callum, so notable for being a human with access to primal magic, is only able to end the fight through use of dark magic. What if this connection to the primal sources could be taught to humans, the way Callum taught it to himself? Erebos would love to give the gift of the Arcana to humanity, but it simply can't be done with the cosmic judges policing the use of primal magic, and magic in general. If Erebos could give humanity the tools to fight the star-touched elves, he would purify them of dark magic forever. Who would want to use shitty dark magic when primal magic doesn't make you sick? Of course, if humanity doesn't make the choice to help, Callum will have to be prepared to die, which could have further complications down the line if Erebos finds his way out of prison again. Is it the best possible resolution? Probably not. I came up with it in a few minutes, and I'm just one guy. But it's in character for Erebos, it addresses his actual goal, which is hurting the Star-Touch elves who killed his daughter, and it forces Callum to make a choice that is bigger than just a hero being willing to sacrifice their own life. Heroes do that shit all the time. Real sacrifice would be putting the purity of all humanity on the line. Is he really willing to subject humanity to an existence that breeds the conditions for dark magic? Is learning the arcana worth taking up arms against the gods of this world? If it's not, is he really willing to make that decision on behalf of all of humanity? Either way, he makes a sacrifice, and Erebos does his thing by tempting a human. Erebos can make whatever offer he wants. It will always be up to humans to accept the offer. So, don't let him predict your actions. Make a choice that will actually take him off guard because it's a genuine sacrifice. This show was so deliberate with its approach to magic as a risk, as a kind of knowledge, as a test. Callum has to do dark magic to acquire his primal source arcana. Both times he learns a new kind of primal magic, it comes off the heels of doing dark magic to save the people he loves, sacrificing a bit of himself to achieve something. By contrast, Claudia regularly fails to sacrifice her family, and dark magic just keeps beating down on her as a result, taking her leg and her sanity and her entire sense of self. This show made all these keen observations about sacrifice and suffering and pain and self-discipline and discovery that Arcane couldn't even figure out how to discuss with any kind of fluency. But Arcane got one fundamental thing right. There's got to be a sacrifice. What the Dragonprince decides to leave you off with is that the heroes of our story were saved from having to corrupt themselves by the sacrifices of the archdragons. This is explicitly stated. I mean, how could it not be? The finale feels watery and boring for a reason. We didn't feel the presence of any tension, and we know that the heroes haven't had to sacrifice anything. Erebos teaches them nothing. At the very least, if these characters were willing to make sacrifices, if Ezrin was willing to commit murder, and Callum was willing to die, and Rayla was willing to kill Callum, at least make someone make the damn sacrifice. Following the oven incident, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus was ostracized from the Sanhedrin. His student, Rabbi Akiva, came to him and euphemistically said, "My teacher, it appears to me that your colleagues are distancing themselves from you." Since Rabbi Akiva was so conscientious, Eliezer was more or less chill about it, sitting on the floor, tearing his clothes, and removing his shoes, signifying that he accepted the ostracization. Rabbi Eliezer may have had a nearly prophetic knowledge of the Torah and God's will, but what he didn't understand was that the nature of humans' relationship to the sublime is supposed to change. It is in our nature to always be becoming something else. If I reference Nietzsche in one more video, I'm gonna spontaneously sprout a neckbeard. That could be kinda cute. He didn't know how to think his own thoughts, an individualist though he was. He couldn't fathom having to cite a textual source, or having to explain his reasoning in logic. He just knew. It's like his mind was somehow one with God's, and so he should have been able to control everyone else's thoughts with just the sheer authority of that. He couldn't sacrifice God for the advancement of his fellow humans, who needed to begin making their own determinations. In the end, a sacrifice is made for him, and he passively acquiesces to the will of his colleagues, and he learns nothing. I don't know much about Eliezer. I hope he had a pleasant life in a secluded cabin in the mountains where he had tea with God every day. I hope that made him very happy. But most of us can't live like that. What really gets me down about the ending of Arcane and the Dragonprince is just how resigned they feel. In my series on Arcane, I've returned a lot to the idea of hubris, which is a recurring theme in the show. I've argued that calling the pursuit of progress hubris is a lazy way of absolving oneself of their choices. The pursuit itself isn't bad. If you harmed another person, you have to confront what you did. My Dragonprince series has focused on the responsibilities of love. When you love someone, you have to treat the people you don't love with particular care. You can't allow your bias for one person to turn into violence against other people, because that kind of violence will fractal outwards infinitely. Arcane has concluded its argument with a statement that some kinds of pursuit are just innately bad, regardless of how humans handle that pursuit. The Dragonprince pins the responsibility for violence onto some guy whose own relationship to the violence that emerges from love is apparently not worth commenting on in any meaningful way. It's just this fatalistic admission that they weren't prepared to have the conversations they started, and they aren't willing to take a risk and challenge their own beliefs now. No one has reckoned with their own flaws and sacrificed an old way of being for a new one. No one wants to cut the umbilical cord with God and deal with being in a world where they create themselves and sculpt their environments. No one wants to kick Eliezer out of the study hall so he can live out his hermetic life blissed out on divinity. No one moved forward, and no one changed. I am closing in on 500 subscribers, which some of you may know from a previous video was my goal for last year, so that feels really good. Thank you. If you'd like to help me get to that level a little bit sooner, you know what to do. Engage, send, share, comment, send me some money on Buy Me a Coffee if you would like to, only if you have enough money to do that. I'm probably going to spend it on calzone, so don't consider it that important. Bye. This video is brought to you by me. You're welcome. I think about stories a lot. Almost constantly. I'm not sure where I am right now. Point is, if you're writing a story and you need some help, you can hire me. I consult on screenplays, write serialized fiction, and yes, I write scripts for YouTube professionally. That's right, you're looking at a pro. Don't check my sub count. You can go to my website to check out my portfolio, read my reviews, look at my prices, and reach out for a chat about how I can help with your project.